All right, here goes. Okay, hi everyone. Welcome to Think Up. I'm joined here by the wonderful Prashant and Matt. And Matt, on the 5th of July, you reposted something that was someone else's @beardedgenius post, which said that it's mad how this country advertises itself around the world with Shakespeare, the Beatles, Charles Dickens, the Rolling Stones, Glastonbury, the West End, the Edinburgh Fringe, Britpop, Spice Girls, Manchester, etc., but couldn't give an F about the arts when they're in trouble. And that then kicked off I wouldn't even say heated debate, but a discussion about the disparity between a country's reliance and enjoyment of the culture, arts and culture, but in fact, that very same reliance seems to not follow through to the support that the country itself that actually relies on that arts and culture when said arts and culture industry is in trouble. Obviously, after that conversation, or during that conversation happening, there was some announcement around the 1.57 billion government support.
Yeah.
Today, at the time of recording, on the Wednesday, the 8th of July, the Chancellor has announced that during August, restaurants will that the government will subsidise restaurant meals by 50% to re-kickstart the hospitality industry. Today, also, stamp duty under £500,000 is what was paused until March. So there's evidently some support packages going on. But Matt, when you wrote this, you evidently cared enough to do it, which is understandable. But also in your comments, you've said about, you know what, we've done a lot of talking about these things now. I'm kind of past conversation of symptoms. Where's the prevention action? So Matt, what brought this about, and what should we actually make happen now?
Oh man, what has brought this about? I mean, I think for at least 3-4 years. I mean, right the way, almost coming out of the womb, I tended to just be that kind of person who'd always be, well, why do we have to do it this way? Why are we doing what we're doing the way we are? And is there not another way that we do it? So, I mean, that's always just been something in me. Apparently, I don't remember this, but my parents told me a story about just before I was due to start school. So I would have been 4. Apparently, I called a meeting to discuss why I shouldn't go to school, why we should actually move to France, live on a farm. And you know, apparently I had all the reasoning behind it, saying because you were both teachers anyway, so you can teach me stuff at home. I can learn about animals. I can learn a new language because we're in a different country. So why do I have to just go to this, you know, and already it was this, you know, well, because that's what we do. And I was like, yeah, I know that's what other people do, but can we not do something different? So,
and that's before your mum became the art teacher and your dad became the head teacher.
Yeah. So I was always up against it.
Right.
So it's always been in me, but I think probably it was heightened as the awareness about climate change was really ramping up, and Greta Thunberg had this movement going on, and you know, it was just seemed to me that there seemed to be such a big discrepancy between what long-term we need as a human race and the structures that are in place. And predominantly it just kept seeming to be the economy as it stands, the economic model as it stands, which maybe had served its purpose, yet had somehow moved to becoming, rather than this, you know, potentially ever-evolving thing, it had become, I mean, Prashant mentioned it the other day, it's become a dogma. So, and we have these discussions around it, but within the discussions, and whenever I've tried to have discussions outside of this kind of forum as well, it always seems to come back this sort of reluctance to recognize that we invented this construct.
Yeah,
and therefore we can reinvent it. And I'm sort of starting to get frustrated with these conversations going around in loops and going, well, what can we do? What action can we start kicking in that might have an educational element and a discussive element?
Yeah.
How does that then relate to action that we can be communicating and examples and start telling a new story?
Got it. And so, and let's, for anyone watching this, let's just go around the quick cycle of whether conversation in itself could arguably be part of action, due to the fact that some of the greatest inventions of all time started with discussions. Prashant, did you commented along those lines in the comments? Can you reiterate for those who didn't necessarily see the comment that you mentioned?
I'll have to see what my comment was.
Well, why don't I remind you, and then you can riff off the back of that. So you said that an actual conversation of this nature recorded on video might inspire people's thoughts, which can be a step in the right direction of action.
Yeah, for sure. Though, I mean, I agree with Matt that there needs to be action, but it should be thoughtful action, and it should be thought. You should think every step along the way you're acting, because otherwise you're going to set yourself up for the same. This has to be permanent. This has to be something big, even if it takes a few years to achieve. But it has to be permanent. We can't rebound to old ways of thinking. We can't leave vacuums for opportunists to manipulate and essentially set in, and basically put something far worse into place.
Sure. Good. Well said. And so, Matt, when we're talking of this topic of action, if you were to condense what it is that, of all the things that need to be changed, how would you describe the actual thing? If I gave you a magic wand and said, here you go, you can wave this and it would change the thing you want to change, what would it be you'd want to change?
I would be changing human beings' attitude towards money, to be open to understanding that it was always a human construct, and it can be evolutionary rather than fixed.
Good. So let's dig into that. So do we feel that, and this is what we're going to spend 15 minutes talking about what the actual thing is that needs to be fixed. And then we'll spend the rest of the time talking about what needs to be done about it.
Right.
So because I'm conscious of the fact that there's a lot of conversations that have been had about the problem, I just want to make sure that we're totally exactly on that problem. As we're talking about money from the removal of money being the priority or wealth generation culture, do we feel as if this is something that is a change that needs to happen from only a public perspective, or including an educational perspective and a governance perspective? And if we are including that, to extrapolate just one step more, the whole construct of capitalism and consumerism, which actually uses money as its vehicle. So where do we stop? Or is it the whole thing?
I think it's the whole thing. But in a central place where, depending on, I think it's really to try and cater for a variety of thinkers. So, it might be that, say, for example, it was a website. And some of it was really focused on education and discussion, and the people that really wanted to get in depth and truly, understand, the history of money, how it's evolved so far, that kind of stuff. And that's fine, it's there. But I feel, for example, there was that, this Seeds cryptocurrency, which I think you initially had shared this link. I started to think this starts to represent an action.
Yeah.
And when you look into it, it does have elements of education. It's very evolutionary. They've set it up to be evolutionary and accept that as our needs change, they need to be more rapidly responsive to echo the time and the needs of that time. But within it still, there was what I think is lacking is that there wasn't an element of it that was really simple, because there's plenty of people that might well be open to a different economic model, but who don't want to spend loads of time reading about it, who don't really want to understand the ins and outs of it, and just want to see, I don't know, for example, okay, so how's this worked so far?
Yeah.
And can I get on board with it?
Yeah, indeed. And so if I were to, if we were to, let's take a logical step for the sake of argument here, and say that one way of taking action is to lobby Parliament, to protest, to sign change.org forms. That's one way.
Yeah.
The other end of the spectrum is very revolutionary behaviour, which actually is kind of kicking out the man, as near as or the efforts to kind of wipe out the infrastructure. And what seems to resonate most with what you're saying is that actually there's this way that actually shows workable, practical things that people can do, so that not only people can see examples of something working, but also we feel as if those who feel as if they want to and we want to actually make a difference can actually physically do something, whether it's to use this or join this. And that's kind of what you're saying.
Yeah, absolutely.
Good. Okay. And just before I'm going to come back to you in a second on that, Prashant, did any of what Matt and I have then gone back and forward on raised any or piqued any interest in your head in terms of how you see this challenge to be, or rather what type of solution we should have?
I mean, I agree completely with Matt's views, and I made this pretty much clear in my, we agree on a lot of things. I'm however more interested in starting with tackling what's under the surface. It's you don't clean a lake by simply picking things that are floating at the surface. You go underneath and it's that kind of thing. So essentially change people's consciousness through, by first transforming education. At this moment, the education system sort of tells you that you're a worker and a consumer. You're only here to pick up a set of skills to put money into the economy. And that, I think, is the root of why, this economic model exists. So you have to strike at that low level. I think the goal of education should be to reinforce the idea of citizenship, the fact that we live in a civic entity and have rights and duties as citizens. That starts with that, and essentially to explore what those rights and duties are. So and to explore. So education should be about intellectual exploration, creativity, and ultimately the education system should be to drive people towards personal fulfillment rather than just a job or a career or a vocation or a profession, because I think this model of consumption is rooted in a lack of personal fulfillment amongst lots of people.
Yeah, very good. Matt, what's your view on that?
I'd agree. I'd agree completely. To challenge that through education is really important. I completely understand what you're saying as well about, you don't just pick up the bits off the top of a lake, but you need to really get underneath and sort of go through the silt and get rid of it and understand why stuff has floated up to the top. But it's also within that process acknowledge that a certain proportion of people that you might want to get on board only want to look at the bits on top. Once those bits are gone, that's all they're worried about. And they might not think any more deeply than that, but without painting the picture at multiple levels to match people's level of kind of interest in their own personal drivers, you can run the risk of framing a new action as really just another forum for thought. And that's how it feels for me a lot of the time. You end up then having another collection of sort of thought leaders, and it's all really interesting, but you just never see anything any direct action, but also if you're not into thinking that deeply, there's nothing else at a more basic level that you can kind of latch onto and get involved with. Even if it was like, okay, how many trees do we need to plant to help climate reversal?
Got it. Okay. Yeah. Point made. Okay. So maybe in fact there's another way which involves a multi-pronged approach, which can look at the top of the lake and the base of the lake. And so in between the times of Pythagoras and Plato, depending on the material you read, there appeared to be a simple doctrine of what they called a tripartite soul. And it sounds complicated, but it really isn't. And basically it was said that there could be three types of people. The first type were people that were known as lovers of gain. They're the people in the arena competing, and I mean that metaphorically and figuratively and literally. Yeah. And then you had lovers of honor, who were to take my sports metaphor further, the lovers they were the sports coaches, and also the crowd who were on the side of one team or another team, or one gladiator or another gladiator. And then you had lovers of wisdom, who are those who actually came to observe and to understand. And so the class system around that time between Pythagoras and Plato were seen in three different types of class. One was those who came to buy and sell and or compete, or rather buy and sell the kind of the trade of the entertainment. Then you had those to compete from a sports team ownership level or a audience level, and then you had those who came to observe. And of course, those third type of people were known as philosophers and thinkers. And so we have, if we're tackling this type of situation, there's probably those who look to see what can be cleaned from the top of the lake now. What's just floating on there, and everyone's looking at it going, that's floating on there, and no one seems to be doing very much about it. And so there's that. That arguably is the lovers of gain, which would be to get rid of the plastic in the lake. And then you have the lovers of honor, which is the kind of the more arguably the more side-taking politicists who do things, who actually is slightly less important than gaining and taking stuff off the lake. It's more important than everyone says that you were the person that took the stuff off the lake. And then you have lovers of observation, who look at who believe that to get rid of the stuff at the top of the lake, you have to understand why the lake was there in the first place, and what it consists of, from a chemical level through to a geopolitical level and macroeconomic policy level. And once you work out that, and the shipping lanes and the mooring fees, you can actually work out the most effective way of removing plastic from the lake. The problem is, for the lovers of gain in the tripartite soul, our three-part soul, is that by the time you've philosophized about who the hell runs the lake and all of that stuff, the lake is triple full of plastic.
Yeah.
Is that what we're kind of talking about here?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, because how many decades already has climate change been flagged as a problem? And we're now at, the close to the 12th hour.
Yeah.
And the plastic is building up. There's still these conversations about what's caused it, and maybe it is and maybe it isn't, and there's still not enough happening.
Yes.
And I do think that part of it is just because there is so much discussion that a lot of people will just get turned off by it because it's just overwhelming. And then also with the doctrination that we've been all brought up with, is that kind of, well, that's all very nice, but it will never change. So we just got to get on with it, and I've still got to pay my bills. Yeah,
sure. And so now let's talk at the around the action element. So there is this there is the newly termed, or relatively newly termed, thing called cancel culture. And cancel culture is something that seems to be becoming more prevalent nowadays. Cancel culture actually was credited to the black users of Twitter, where it used to be used as a hashtag. So any information that came to light around celebrities who were once really loved, like Cosby, Michael Jackson, Roseanne Barr, Louis C.K., there'd be calls to cancel the support of some figures. And this is all part of online shame, if you like. I mean, cancel culture, depending on where you read, is around the removal of support, including the boycott of someone or something, usually a celebrity or public figure, but in recent cases, Mark Zuckerberg and Facebook, by advertisers, who express an opinion that is perceived to be offensive. So when Wetherspoons in the UK had a questionable view of the way of handling staff during COVID, there were calls to say, let's boycott Wetherspoons. Matt, do you feel that the cancel culture activist approach could be one of the strings to the bow of action?
Man, possibly. I think, to me, where I see action going is more. It's almost the other end of the spectrum. It's more inclusive, and it kind of ties in with what you're saying. Where within these, the analogy that you were using, where you've got this group of people that like to pick a side.
Yeah,
it's trying to sort of dispel that, really, and bring more people on board, because there's with the current economic model, there's always going to be at the minute there is this sides, and if for someone like me saying it doesn't always have to be about profit, that's unsustainable anyway, automatically I will be branded as somebody who basically just hates rich people.
Right.
Probably a Labour voter, which I'm not, not really affiliated to any party in particular. But it's trying to recognise that there are hardships with this from all sides.
Mm.
So I don't want to be a CEO having to report into shareholders. I don't want to be, morally bound to these people's welfare. That must be massively stressful.
Yeah.
Almost
as stressful as watching lots of action not happening, thinking, well, something going to happen.
Yeah.
Prashant, from your perspective, do you feel that there is any if you, as an observer as you are, and a brilliant novelist too, by the way, for anyone reading, watching his novel, A Heap of Broken Images, is absolutely brilliant. So anyway, from your perspective, from a novelist, do you have a leaning toward, if there were to be lack of, not just observational standpoint, not just a multi-generational education change standpoint, which everyone who's ever watched any of this will know that I pretty much said on everything cool, what would be a more short-term, accessible type of action that you believe would be tangible?
I mean, look, don't get me wrong. I'm not against starting out, you can have thought and action alongside, coexisting alongside each other. To be honest, I think whatever, I haven't thought much of the action part, but if I had to play a role in this, I'd like to, let the people who want to be in charge of the action start with the action, and I'd like to be on the sidelines for creating a long-term solution so that all this doesn't have to happen again. Because you said that whole thing about by the time you finish thinking, there'll be the amount of clutter in the lake will have built up. But then, is it better to keep clearing out the lake, or just clear it out once and for all, even with the rising levels of clutter?
Indeed, and I think that that I believe represents what I would call a paradox rather than a problem. Problems have an answer, which is well, it's obviously better to sort the lake out once and for all, or actually just get the lake cleared, and then we can maybe see the lake more clearly. But so that would be a problem answer. A paradox answer is that there isn't one there isn't one answer or not. There's a balance between them all, and that's the paradox of it all. And I'm okay with paradoxicality. I think from my side, and I know I spend a lot of these calls as an interviewer, and just to add my shilling into the hat, as it were, if I were to change one thing right now, in general, it would be what I would call dream accessibility. And what I mean by dream accessibility is a lot of people at once, as many as possible at once, from all different parts of society, to experience an alternative scenario in a very short period of time without having to trial it by some form of long-term faith in a 6-year program and let's measure the results. I believe that virtual reality is the only thing I've seen in the history of time of what I've observed, from only the content I can observe, that can give for believers and non-believers, because I would have said actually that meditation and tapping into the pineal gland is a relatively equal size of seismic shift of dream accessibility. But so I'm now taking the most accessible version. If I could give out billions of virtual reality headsets free of charge, and inside those virtual reality headsets, we could live in an economy that wasn't geared towards a wealth mindset, wealth creation, and actually experience palpably what it actually would be like. And by the way, I have significant citational references to support that working, not least from Goldsmiths University, where I've just finished my first part of my virtual reality course. In the mental health world, it has had an absolutely profound impact on people who are suffering from various different mental health issues.
Yeah.
And the virtual reality simulations change their entire perspective of life. And so I'm thinking, we as a people have a mental health problem.
Yeah.
So I'm extrapolating it across people. And what we need is to be able to accessibly dream. And so Prashant earlier said that education should be, and I'm super paraphrasing you, Prashant, off the top of my head, I think you said something like, education should be an intellectual investigation and creativity that leads to fulfillment. If that were to be the case, then my view of dream accessibility would enable all of the above to happen, but in a very, very fast way. Because going to an offshore country, or going offline and creating a farm somewhere with an alternative currency or a barter economy, that's fine in terms of the people that can do that. That's accessible to those who have a way of life that can enable that. My biological father is one of them, who lives as a hermit in a farm in Spain, and his trade is he makes sculptures out of leather and stone and trades it for fruit and vegetables and some healing and stuff like that. So his entire currency. Which leaves it up to the rest of his extended family to pay for him to fly into and out of other places in the world. So he's able to. But if you weren't able to do those things and were given the ability to accessibly dream an alternative, that would be the fastest way that people would go, hold on a minute. In a similar way to in my life, when I stopped even being able to do what I did for a career, let alone want to, I've ended up in a situation where I couldn't not accessibly dream an alternative because I was forced into an alternative. And it's like, well, now all I have is alternative. And that, I think that's what we need. We need to somehow have dream accessibility.
I love that idea. I absolutely love that idea, because it ties in with previous conversations where I've said about modeling. Modeling still exists. So if you could give it a much more experiential quality, so you could go in and you would be part of that modeling, and maybe how you reacted within those virtual realities might then also tie into making this much more organic and can evolve at a faster rate as well, because your reaction to the virtual reality starts feeding into the remodeling. Yeah. You start to find out what works, what doesn't work, and what didn't we actually know until we started experiencing, and what other possibilities have come out of it.
There you go. I mean, to such an extent, if I piece together the modern technologies that we have, if I were to set up, to create a manifesto with 20 or 30 or 50 or 70 other co-writers of a manifesto of change, and then create a Kickstarter campaign that would raise as much money as humanly possible to buy the most affordable, or even through a sponsor, for virtual reality headsets, that got those headsets programmed with some form of alternative scenario mapping that could be given to a lot of people, you'd be able to create a very fast awareness of alternative ways forward.
Absolutely. The other thing I think it would cover is, from previous conversations, like when Ron mentioned the Matthew Syed Rebel Ideas book, and this whole need for cognitive diversity. Well, it's built into it. As long as you give those virtual headsets to different people from different walks of life, then you don't have to spend a load of time analyzing or trying to see from their perspective. They directly experience it and react to the reality based on how they see the world.
Totally. And here's perfect. And here's a rebellious thought then. How about if, rather than trying to raise money to give everyone virtual reality headsets with a simulation built in, how about getting a cross-section of the population and Parliament to be part of a human experiment of alternative approaches? And they are the people that actually get that. And it's done as a scientific experiment from a psychology university. That actually was right. What was the outcome? And by the way, the simulation alternatives that we started with was, how could we run in a society that didn't prioritize wealth gain as its main thinking? And let's do a scientific. So for those who think this is all nonsense, let's look at the scientific data. We'll interview people on the way in, see what's happening inside there, interview people on the way out. They do vox pops on TV. And now all of a sudden you can have company owners, school kids, politicians speaking about alternatives that they didn't know because they were never subject to being able to have dream accessibility.
Yeah. I love this. When do we do it? When do we kickstart this? Let's do it.
I'm glad you like that, because I haven't ever said it out loud to anyone really, other than my fiance.
I think related to the whole thing of dream accessibility, I had a sort of, a similar experience like that yesterday. I was watching something on Netflix, and it was set in a small Spanish village. And when you're in North America, everything's new and everything's commercial and everything is fairly uniform and industrialized. And you see this village with old streets and old bridges and all that sort of thing. And you think that, oh, wow, is this the sort of thing the inhabitants have to get to see every day? And, that sort of, it's the sort of vibe, it's the spirit of the city. And so, I mean, that's you're actually facing up to, you're actually being faced with an alternative possibility there.
That's it. And I'm convinced now, because I'm a fan of the long-term education approach. And, as I've always said, and I think these are multi-generational step changes, and I'm doing my bit on that. That's one of the reasons why I'm learning all the stuff I'm trying to learn, is to actually build a better education platform and to reconstruct how we think about thinking. And to Matt's question, when do we start this? Your response to this has given me confidence enough to, why don't I write down this as a mission statement and put it in a Google sheet, and then just distribute it to everyone on ThinkUp and go, look, how much is this horseshit and what needs to be adjusted? I do have the fortune of being connected to people inside the technology world enough, and also the halls of power enough in various different ways, to at least, and also, by the way, to the press enough to say, I mean, I could contact some journalists and say, listen, it's a bit audacious, but the premise of what we're thinking is this. We'd like to run a test to see whether or not, if people are exposed to different versions of the way things could be, whether or not they actually reject them wholesale because that's what they are, or whether or not, just in the mental health world of virtual reality, it appears that people experiencing something, their body doesn't know whether they're experiencing something that's real or not real. It doesn't, and the brain doesn't either. there is a bit inside our brain that tries to remind us out of what's called the three illusions. And if you can't pass those three illusions, which is largely around believability due to your perception of your body, perception of place, and what's called plausibility illusion, which is as to whether or not that's likely to actually happen. If we can cover those three illusions, then all of the theses that I've read have resulted in people actually changing the way that they view things, and it could be a significantly insightful scientific outcome that then we then have a flag. If you're going to stand behind a flag, then make sure it's fucking bulletproof, right?
Yeah.
Okay. Well, I'll write that. I'll write that mission statement and then distribute it with you guys, and then let's add to it, and then share it widely with anyone. I won't say that I own it. This will be inside a Google Doc, signed by no one. Let's just create it as a think piece. I'll kick it off and then send it around. But if we need journalists, people of power, chief execs, politicians, and children and regular people like us to be part of that experiment. I also think that Ed O'Grady from the Leeds College of Psychology who's actually just about to write the foreword to my next book. If I wasn't just dropped by my publisher, he would have written the foreword to my next book. He's probably the person on the psychology point to run this as a scientific piece of work, so that we don't have to deal with the but armchair politicians who go, oh, you bloody Labour supporters. We can actually just say, this isn't politics, mate. This is science. We're just look at this and see whether or not people actually want a different scenario.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
All right. Good.
Well, that was easy. If you'd led with that, this could have been done in 5 minutes.
That was only my first beer then. I'm on my second beer now.
Oh, no. I wish I thought ahead and got my own stash.
Prashant, this is unlike you, mate. I'd say 90% of the calls we've ever done, you've actually had one or two beers on. Not saying that that's what makes you a brilliant and creative writer or anything, but okay, good. So let's do all of the above. I'll publish this talk on ThinkUp. Actually, Matt, I wanted to say something different. I wanted to add on to this as well. When on our ThinkUp conversation, someone said Facebook is a useless medium for discussing these things. You then said absolutely. I think what I hear is that just all talk doesn't equal enough action for some, and so. But to be slightly semantic about it, I can't see why the Facebook platform is any worse or better than any other platform. And I can't really see a medium problem, but I can definitely see a lack of action problem from humans willing to get involved.
So, I mean, you have to see it as a tool. You can use a tool any way you can use a knife for surgery, or you can use it to kill someone.
That's right. And you can cut someone out of a car as well. So it's like this. It's, thank God for the knife. And so I just wanted to. The reason I'm saying this now is that do you feel that this was a point about lack of action as opposed to Facebook? Because I don't have any loyalty to Facebook, but I just wondered what you thought.
I was actually meant it in the context of having a decent conversation, because now how much of that is down to the algorithms and how much of that is down to the way people are, I guess the jury's still out. But it was really more to do with the fact that I find out of the platforms that I use, Facebook is just so binary. And you find that, especially when you're trying to discuss something that you're very passionate about, which is more of a paradox than a problem.
Yeah.
People just want to treat it like a problem, or they just don't have the time or interest. So
yeah, I agree.
I just find it very hard to ever. I don't think I've ever had a Facebook conversation which I've come away at the end of that going, "Oh, that was lovely. Actually, I've enriched my own thinking. I've got a broader concept of the overall issue now." Normally, I've come away going, people are pricks.
That's right.
You know? So that's really why I was.
Yeah, I get it.
That was where my comment was coming from.
Got it. Prashant, what have you got on that one?
Well, I mean, is that a problem with Facebook itself, or what Facebook has done to people? I mean, if you've interacted with someone in their, early to mid 20s today, they actually, I mean, apparently watching YouTube videos is a thing, and not specific videos. I mean, not the kind of videos I'd watch, as in, I'd go on to YouTube and key in something specific, like Heaven Knows I'm Miserable Now by the Smiths or something like that, which has become my theme song generally in the world. But it's just random stuff. Apparently people know the names of influencers, the way some people know the names of porn stars. People know the names of influencers, and I find that a bit bizarre. And that's just the way culture is today. It's just a very shallow, superficial culture where people want instant gratification. That really is what it is.
And therefore I can close that neatly without even needing too much of a segue to say, well, let's show people different, and let's show an alternative, and then let's see whether or not the alternative is as attractive or unattractive as real life. I must admit, on a slightly dystopian viewpoint, that maybe we needed to let things get this shit before the alternative actually makes sense.
Well, I mean, to have people thinking in terms of ideas would be a good first step, really. I mean, generally.
That's why I call it dream accessibility.
And then something great always comes up when lots of ideas come together.
Exactly.
Great is born out of lots of ideas coming together.
Matt, what are you going to say?
I just think, I agree again. And I think part of the additional despair and the kind of like, can we just do something, was I thought that COVID was going to represent that very opportunity. I thought that was the shitness. That was what we needed to make people go, oh, this really is bad. But it didn't take long before the talk about a new normal got superseded again by really not a very new normal at all. And you look at the stimuluses that are happening and the way that they're encouraging people to, you get your food cheaper during the week or whatever. It's still the same model.
That's right.
Speaking of which, actually, to Matt's point, I'd like to add a little something. So I think, the reason why COVID hasn't brought any substantial change is that this is the first time when, in the course of a pandemic, we're somewhat insulated from the actual effects of the pandemic. We live in comfortable middle class houses. We only know the statistics, whereas in previous pandemics, previous plagues, etc., people actually saw other people fall dead in the middle of the street, and they actually knew the whole magnitude of what was going on. So this is why COVID actually hasn't really done anything.
I have to footnote that for any of those watching who COVID has had a significant impact, not least the fact that COVID wiped my entire career out and I'm now bankrupt with no fixed abode. But my daughter was frontline key worker for 3 months, dealing with COVID patients, and with wearing a hazmat suit, actually dealing with people with this, some of whom died. But I think, yes, on a macro
level,
yes, on a macroeconomic perspective and a revolutionary perspective en masse, for me, I think you're right. COVID has not necessarily had an immediate impact in that opportunistic thinking. But I would say this, that my thinking since COVID has fundamentally deepened, not changed, but deepened, because I used the opportunity of not working to learn as much as I possibly could about neurology and virtual perception. And I've read so much about how you can change people's minds. And if we're in the business of changing people's minds, I now know that we have a sliver of opportunity.
Mm.
And I'm also aware of the fact that the press are really keen on stories about what COVID has brought about. And what I would like to do is I almost use the word manipulate, lean into the press's desire to talk about what's going on and people's desire to want some form of action, and technology's desire to reach tipping point. Because remember, in the virtual and augmented and mixed reality spaces, these technologies are nowhere near mass adoption. And so it's only the very, very few that can afford these things. And one of the things that could enable mass adoption is when, I mean, my professor at the University of London Goldsmith, who majored in the psychotherapy parts of and psychology parts of virtual reality, this is someone who deserves a fucking Nobel Peace Prize, and she can't even get people to even read any of her work, and it's like, Jesus. So yeah, COVID has certainly enabled my ability to spend 9 hours a day studying virtual reality. I can tell you that much.
Well,
you know what?
That comment wasn't intended at you, by the way. I mean, it was just a general observation on how people.
I was caveating, Prashant. Had to caveat because you know what Facebook's like, right?
Oh yes, absolutely.
Yes, Matt.
I think the other interesting thing that the virtual reality technology and really experiencing scenarios that your brain can't separate from actual reality, it starts delving into, I think, another problem, which is the way that we engage with our own mortality, i.e. we don't generally. Whereas, so the whole thing's about like the risk of climate change. I think people react to it no differently to a smoker who just thinks, well, yeah, smoking can kill people, but it won't kill me.
That's right.
Whereas if you can have scenarios and say, okay, well, one of the scenarios is you're going to get to experience using computer modeling what your environment will be in 30 years' time if we go on the same trajectory, and you are immersed in it.
That's right. I've said on the one of the calls recently, I said that I've often thought that if you don't believe that climate change is a thing, at least opt into a virtual reality environment where you live is 1.2 meters higher sea level.
Yeah.
Then
right.
really, 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 really fast believe what the hell's going on. It's like, it's and I think we need to make things really palpable. I think there needs to be a creation of a set of experiences that look at equality in general. And in fact, you know what? Let's do this if we're gonna really use the press on our side for this. Why don't we take the 17 United Nations general guiding policies, not least the reduction of inequalities, not least the sustainable developments, and use them as the scenarios.
Yeah.
And actually show what those scenarios actually mean. And
right.
I will write that paper. I will write a couple of paragraphs about what I've said, and then let's add to that relatively rapidly if it needs to be, and then maybe we'll get people to look at it, get people to sign up to that, to actually go, and this isn't a company. It's not in fact, the first thing after that kind of paper would be written would be to hand this over to a university of psychology and go, listen, we're not monetizing this. This is the most scientific awareness campaign of change. That's what we're doing.
Yeah. I love it.
Oh yeah.
Good. All right, cool. Well, fantastic. Thank you very much, chaps. I will kick that off and then let's just keep dwelling it. But I'm with you, and I do live in this duality. I'm also in the tripartite soul. I'm number 1 and 3. I don't really give a shit about number 2 anymore. I have no interest in having to be right or wrong. Those days are gone. Anyway, so I will see you both anon. And Prashant, not only did you correctly point out that COVID hasn't had any pivots into a large seismic shift that we'd always want. I should also say that your opinion on these things has been always beautifully put with the respect to all human race. And I don't think I know of any person who prioritizes fulfillment through creativity and intellectual curiosity as much as you. And I love our conversations. I always will do.
Oh, thank you.
There you go. Just wanted to footnote with that.
Oh.
Hey, chaps.
Nice.
Enjoy the rest of your day.
All right. Thanks so much. Pleasure talking to you as always, Jonathan.
Always. Likewise. See you guys.
Cheers.